Hello and welcome back to How to Build an AI, The Chronicles of Jobot. This is an online course where we are chronicling the journey of building Jobot, an AI or an artificial intelligence agent powered by a bunch of different state-of-the-art APIs and ML models and having a bunch of different capabilities like intelligence, skills, hearing, speech, memory, creativity, vision, and you'll have a web app where you can interact with Jobot, and you'll also have REST APIs so that you can incorporate Jobot's abilities into any application, Discord bots, etc. So I hope you've had a chance to check out the first lesson. If you haven't, do check it out. But we'll continue to build on what we did the last time. And the topic for today is Jobot meets the world. So today we are going to add user authentication on the web application for Jobot so that everyone can interact with Jobot easily. Now, the course page is howtobuildanai.com. This is where you will find all the course material. And you can check out First Contact with Jobot episode 1. And in episode 1, we basically built a simple UI, a simple chat GPT clone, essentially, where you can just ask a question. So you can say, hi, who are you? And hit send. So there's a send button here that you can use. Let me just reduce the size. Yeah. So there's a send button here where you can hit send. But of course, the user would have to enter their OpenAI API key in order to actually send the message. So let's grab an API key. So I'm going to grab it from a different desktop. And you can get this OpenAI API key from OpenAI platform settings after creating a developer account. And you can send a message and Jobot can reply, hi, I'm Jobot, a helpful and versatile AI created by Jovian using state-of-the-art ML models, etc. Okay. So what we're going to do today is maybe remove the requirement for having an API key and let users sign in, create an account on jobot.dev to interact with Jobot. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So let's get started. I hope you're excited. So today we are going to continue focusing on the intelligence and the web application. So we've already incorporated the GPT 3.5 or GPT-4 API to impart intelligence to Jobot. And we've built out a web application, but today we'll improve that web application. So we will take some steps to introduce Jobot to the world where people can log in and interact with Jobot easily without having to enter an API key. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to add a sign-in page. So we're going to have a sign-in page where a user can enter an email and enter a verification code to actually sign in onto the website. And once somebody is signed in, we are going to have this conversation user interface like we have already. And except that people do not need to put in their OpenAI API key, we'll put in our API key securely only for signed-in users. And we are going to then let them chat with Jobot. Okay. So this tutorial builds on the previous tutorial. So we will continue building on the code base of the previous tutorial. And it also assumes knowledge of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Git, VS Code, React.js, Next.js, and Tailwind CSS. But in case you're not familiar with these, we have links to beginner-friendly resources. So in a day or two, you can pick up some of these skills enough so that you can understand them. And you can also ask Jobot for help or ChatGPT whenever you're working on these. All right. So here's the site we built in the previous tutorial. We have this navbar with an API key input, and we have this message history, and we have this input box at the bottom where you can send messages. And you can find the code here. The finished code will become available in the main repository, jovianhq/jobot. The starter code has been pushed into a branch of the main repository, so you can always access the starter code, which is the code that we reached at the end of episode 1. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is head over to GitHub. So here is the GitHub repository. Remember, our GitHub repository is jovianhq/jobot. But of course, if you've created your own, you'll have your own GitHub repository. And in this repository, we have this Jobot web folder that contains all the code. Now, by the way, if you have questions at any point, please drop them in the chat or leave a comment and we'll answer all of them. Now, we want to code this, and to code it, we're going to use GitHub Codespaces machine. So I am going to click here on orange fish stick. This is the code space that I had created the last time. So let me maybe just first, okay, so let me click on this and this should open up. Now, in case you do not already have a code space that you've set up, then you might need to create a new code space, and while creating, you might run into some restrictions. So you can always go into github.com/codespaces and delete any older code spaces to avoid any issues. So you might need to go and delete older code spaces because GitHub gives you a limited number of free code spaces. However, all this development that we're doing can be done completely for free. Okay, so here is the code. Now, a quick overview of the code here. We're not going to get into too much detail. I encourage you to check out the previous one. But here we have this Jobot web folder. This is a Next.js project, Jobot web. And in this, we have a src folder, which contains all our pages. And in the src folder, we have a pages folder. And in the pages folder, we have this index.js file. And it's this index.js file which basically contains all the code. So in this index.js file, if I just scroll down here, you can see here that we have code for a navigation bar. We have some code for a message input box. Right over here, we have some code for a message input box, and we have some code for a message history. And then we have some logic. We have some logic over here to keep track of the API key that is being entered in the navigation bar. And we have the send request function over here. This send request function simply takes the message, sends that to the OpenAI API, gets the response and displays it on the screen. And it does that in a streaming fashion. Okay. And we can run this by opening up a terminal. So we can go to View Terminal and open up a terminal window over here. And we can simply say npm run dev. Oh, first we need to enter the Jobot web folder, and we simply say npm run dev. And now we can start running this code. Okay, so we're going to get this URL, and this URL basically is the development server. So the code space machine is on the cloud where we are developing, and when we run the server for testing, then GitHub gives us a URL where we can access the development server. And again, I can just go in here. I can say, hey, who are you? And put in an API key. Of course, I need to put an API key here in the nav bar and click send. And I can have a conversation with Jobot. Okay, great. So this is what we have so far. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to add a sign-in button here instead of an API key. And we want to let users create accounts. Now, we need some sort of a backend database. We need some sort of a place where we can store user accounts, and that is where we are going to create a project on this platform called Supabase. Okay, so before we do that though, because currently we are looking at the main branch. So currently we are looking at the branch main. We may not want to directly make changes to our main branch. We want to branch out. We want to go into a separate branch and test our changes on a separate branch, maybe create a pull request and then merge it back to main when we are ready to deploy them to production. So I'm going to create a new branch by saying git checkout -b. And let's just call this branch user login. Okay. And now I'm going to start making changes in this new branch. All right. So make sure that anytime you have some application deployed already, in this case, the application is deployed to jobot.web. Make sure that if you're making some changes, first you create a branch, make the changes there, and then merge those changes back after testing. Okay. Now, the way we are going to add user login is using a platform called Supabase. Now, Supabase is basically an open source platform that allows developers to build scalable real-time applications and provides a PostgreSQL database, an online cloud database for free with certain limits. It also provides user authentication, and it provides a bunch of other things that you can add. Okay, so to sign up for a Supabase account, we simply have to go to supabase.com. So I'm going to go to supabase.com. And in my case, I've already signed in here. But if you haven't, you can just click sign in or start your project and sign up with GitHub. All right. And now, once you're here on your Supabase account, you can create a new project. So I'm going to create a new project in the organization Jovian, and I'm going to use the free. Okay, looks like. Yeah, I'm going to use the free project. Well, looks like I can't create a free project anymore. So let me delete an older project so that I can actually create a free project. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of the platforms that allow you to use free resources have certain limitations. Okay, so now I'm going to create a new project called Jobot. And in this new project, I need to give it a database password. So let me give it a strong database password. So I'm just going to put in a database password over here, and it's going to generate a password for me. And you should copy that password and keep it somewhere safe so that you'll be able to use this password to actually connect with Supabase. Next, we have this region over here. So in region, I'm simply going to select the South Asia Mumbai region because that is where I'm based. And Supabase will not only be used to save user accounts, it will also be used to then store messages, store conversation histories, etc. And I'm going to use the free pricing plan and create a new project. Okay. So just to recap, what we're doing here is we are trying to create JoBot, this AI, and to this AI we've given some intelligence using GPT-3, and now we want to add user authentication to this web app so that people can interact with it before we add a bunch of other abilities to it. Okay, so with that, our project would get created. It might take a second or two to actually get created. Let's see. Let's give that a second. All right, let me go back and check here. So yeah, now we have this project, JoBot, and it says we are provisioning your database and API endpoints, and this may take a few minutes. So it's possible that it might take a few minutes to actually set things up. Okay. So we have created a project after creating a Supabase account. Next, we need to use this Supabase project to actually help people create user logins, and we're going to use this login mechanism where we are going to allow people to enter an email, and then we're going to send them a code over email, and they can then send that code or enter that code on our page to actually log in with that email. Okay, so it's a OTP based verification or one-time passcode based verification, and we're doing this because we want to avoid passwords and all. We want to have password-less authentication. Okay, says this project does not exist. Yeah, seems like we ran into some kind of an issue while creating the project. Let me try that again. Let me delete this project as well, just so that we don't run into issues. All right, so let's try that again. Let me create a project called JoBot Dev. Just give it a slightly different name. And yeah, let me just select the location again, South Asia, Mumbai, and let's create a project. All right, finally, now the project is created, and now we should be ready to start using this project. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is head over into the authentication section. So if I zoom in here, I'm going to come in here and go into the authentication section. Now in the authentication section, okay, looks like it's going to take a minute. So how about we do this before we do all of this, before we set things up? Let us find a way to actually connect to Supabase. Let us connect to Supabase using our Next.js application. Now to connect to Supabase, Supabase has a bunch of helper libraries. So it has this JavaScript library, it has this Next.js helper library, and a React helper library. So I'm just going to install all of these libraries. So let me go in here into my code base, and in the terminal over here, I'm simply going to go into the JoBot web. I'm going to go into the JoBot web folder and run npm install and install the Supabase JS library, the Supabase Next.js helpers library, the Supabase authentication helpers or React authentication helpers library. Okay, so I'm going to install a bunch of libraries that will allow me to connect my Next.js project, my React project to the Supabase project that I have just created. And Supabase will be used for the database. Supabase will also be used for authentication of users. All right, perfect. Now, the next thing we need to do is actually set up an environment variable. So we are going to we need to connect to our Supabase database. For that, we need to get some credentials from our Supabase database setup. So you can see here, we have this project URL, and then we have this API key or anon key. Both of these things are going to need to be passed into the Supabase library for it to work properly. So for this, we need to create a file called .env.local. So inside our JoBot web folder, I'm going to create a file .env.local. And by the way, all these instructions are actually given here in the Next.js Supabase guide. All right. So this helper library or Supabase's documentation is great, and they tell you exactly what you need to do to set things up properly. You install the auth helpers for Next.js, for React, and then you have to create this .env.local file where you need to put in a bunch of credentials. So we need to put in 3 things here. Into this .env.local inside the Jobot web or the Next.js application folder, we need to put in the Next.js Supabase URL. So that's the first thing. So we'll grab that and put that in here, Next.js Supabase URL. We also need to put in the anon key, the anonymous key that is going to be used to connect to the Supabase project from the Next.js app when it's running. And I'm also going to additionally put in my OpenAI API key, because this OpenAI API key is going to be used later when we are going to create an API endpoint, which is going to be accessible to logged in users. Okay, so I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to do this securely in another window over here. So I'm not going to show you this, but basically what I'm doing is I am simply putting in the anon key, and I am putting in my OpenAI API key, both of which are secret, both of which I should not be revealing to anyone. So I'm going to put them into env.local. Just replace these XXX values. Okay. So this is the anon key. I've copied the anon key, and now I am pasting it here in my Supabase. Yeah, I've copied the anon key, and now I'm pasting it here in my env.local file outside of your view. And I'm also going to grab my OpenAI API key, and I'm going to paste that as well in my .env.local file. Okay. Now the .env.local file will be read automatically by Next.js, and the Supabase helper auth functions are going to pick it up automatically from there. Okay. Again, all of this is things that you can very easily look up in the documentation. All we are doing is connecting Supabase Next.js to Supabase. Okay. Now that we've done that, our .env.local file is set. Next, we need to put some code inside pages/app.js. And the same thing is present here as well. So we need to open up pages/app.js. So we have this pages/app.js. This is sort of the default application shell that is present in Next.js. And we need to just pass in some Supabase related code here. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to import a few things. We need to import this. Okay, so we need to import this create Supabase client helper from Supabase auth next helpers. We need to import the session context provider from Supabase auth helpers React, and use state from React. Then we need to create a new Supabase client. So what we do here is we just create a new Supabase client over here like this. So use state, and that creates a Supabase browser client. So this is going to be used on the browser, obviously. And then we need to put in this session context provider. So we need to put in the session context provider. What this will do is this will automatically give us information about any currently logged in users on our application. And this will also give us access to a Supabase client. And using that client is how we can actually make requests to Supabase. Okay. So again, not something that you would that I would expect you to know, or even I knew till a few moments ago. I simply looked up the documentation for the Supabase helpers, and it said that to connect Supabase to Next.js, this is the code that you have to put in. So get used to copy pasting some stuff from the documentation and making sure it works. All right, so now we've done that. We've set up the application. The next step for us is to maybe start refactoring things a little bit. So now what we can do is, the first thing we'll do is maybe check out this index.js file. So in this index.js file, we have this navbar over here. Right here at the bottom, we have this, right here at the top of the page, we have this navbar, and this navbar has this API key input box. Let me just extract this navbar into a separate component, and let me instead put in a sign in or a sign out button here. Okay. So instead of an API input. So I'm going to go into SRC, in the SRC folder inside my Jobot web, and I'm going to create a new folder here called components. Okay, so we are going to create a folder called components, inside which we are going to put some reusable components for our Next.js application. And specifically, let me create a file navbar.js. Oops, navbar.js. Let's try that again. Yeah. And now into this navbar.js, I'm going to create export function navbar. In fact, export default function navbar. So this is how you basically create a component in React. You just say, you create a new file, and then you say export default function component name, and then you return from it something. So I could just return a div called navbar. All right, like that. Now, if I wanted to use this component in my main page, index.js page, I could simply come in here right at the top and I could say import navbar from from dot dot slash component slash navbar. All right, so the default export from navbar.js, which is this navbar component, is going to be imported here into this navbar variable. And now I can simply use this navbar component over here. So right above the navigation bar that we already have, let me put in navbar like that. Okay, and let's see what happens. So now, of course, I need to start the application. So I'm just going to do npm run dev so that the server is actually running. All right, now let me just reload this page. And let's see what happens over here. Yeah, it's going to take a moment. The first time the server runs, it takes a minute to start up properly. But yeah, so now you can see that we have this navbar showing up right at the top. Right over here, you can see that we have this navbar showing up. But of course, inside navbar, we don't actually just want to print navbar. We want to take all of this existing content and move that into our navbar component over here. All right. So I'm going to come in, remove this, and paste this in here. And now all this existing code is gone from index.js, and now it has come in here into this navbar.js. And now I get an error saying API key is not defined. Right. So inside our navbar, we have this input, which has this API key. So let me just remove that input because we are not going to ask the user to enter an API key anymore. All right. So now we have this navbar, and this navbar is coming from the navbar.js file. Why have we done that? One, to make our code files a little shorter, easier to manage. Second, so that we can reuse the navbar on multiple pages. Maybe we have a login page or a logout page, and we can reuse it in all those places. Okay. All right. So now let's add maybe a link here. So let me add, by the way you add a link in Next.js is by including the link component. So you import link from next/link. And sometimes you don't actually have to write that import statement. What you can do is you can simply start typing the name of the component and it will suggest something and you hit enter and it's going to auto import for you. Okay, so you say link instead of the A tag, you say link. That's just how Next.js navigation works. And let us navigate this to a page /login and let us just say login over here. Okay, and let's see what happens now. So now you see what happened here. We now have this login link instead of the button here, and clicking on this login link simply navigates the page. If you see the end of the page now, or the end of the URL, it has simply navigated to /login over here. And of course, right now we don't actually have a page at /login. So we need to first create that page so that we can actually navigate to it properly. Okay. So I'm going to come back in here and let me actually go ahead and create a page called login.js. So I'm going to come back into my pages folder, and into my pages folder, I'm going to create a new file called login.js. Okay, so all we are doing here is we have an index page or the main root page. Now we are going to add a second page called login.js. And again, the way you create a page is just a component. So you say export default function login. And what it does is, let's say for now, let us just print in here login page. Okay, like that. All right, export default function login page. So now if I come back here and I click the login link in the navbar, it opens up this login page. All right, so I hope you're understanding the basic structure of how a Next.js application works. We have the pages folder. Inside it, we have this index folder, which is the main page that gets rendered automatically. Then we have this login page that we created by adding. So for handling the /login route, we simply create a login.js page and we can put anything inside it. Now let's maybe make our login page a little nicer. Maybe what I can do here is I can go in and I can say, let's see, let me just add this same head part from my index page into the login page as well, like that. And yeah, so now we've added a head. And again, this head is coming from next/head. And let us still put another like a simple div saying login page. Yeah, so now our login page still says login page, but now it has this nice header here at the top. So that's nice. Then maybe another thing that we can do is maybe we can get in this same flex call with the nav bar in here. So let's get that in here as well. So let's get rid of this and let's get this container back. So now we have this container which is taking up the entire width of the page essentially, and entire height of the page as well, and we've added this nav bar here as well. Okay, so just like that, now we on not only on slash, which is the index.js page, on login.js as well, on slash login as well, we have the nav bar. So we have created a shared nav bar between these two pages. That is how you create shared components. So you create a components folder somewhere, you can call it whatever you want, create a component inside it, export it from there, use it within index.js after importing, and you can use it within login.js or any other page of your choice. Okay, now that we are here, let me go in and actually create the user interface for the login page. So let's do this. Let's create a div over here. And in this div, let's see, I think I have some code here for the user interface. So I'm just going to use that as a reference. So, all right. So I'm going to create a div which remains centered on the screen. So let's see. Yeah, so I have this div here, and this is going to contain a login dialog essentially. Okay, this login dialog. Now let's create an actual login dialog over here. So I create a div, and this div is going to be my login dialog. Basically just a simple box that is going to ask for the user's username and user's name, email, and maybe a verification code. So let's maybe first give this a border. Let's give this a margin of 4. Let's give this a padding of 4 units each. Okay, so now we have this box over here. Let's make sure that it takes up the full width of the screen. Okay, again, these are all simple Tailwind CSS classes. So I'm not going to go into exact details about what we are doing here, but basically we're just creating some user interface over here, right? So yeah, this is the login dialog. We wanted to take up the full width. All right, and like that. Let's just reload that. Yeah, so this is a login dialog, and inside this login dialog, we are going to put in a bunch of inputs. So let me put in one input here of type text, or actually of type email, and let me put in another input here of type password. Essentially, well, that's going to be used to create an input field for entering the verification code. And let's give these both a class name. So let's give this a border. Let's give this, yeah, so there's that input field over there. Let's make it rounded. And similarly, let's give this a class name as well. Let's give this a border. Let's make this rounded. All right, so we have two input fields. Of course, we want to show them one below the other. So we can say flex call. Again, all of this is just HTML and CSS. That's why I'm kind of running through this. And let's give these a placeholder. Let's put email in here. And let's put a placeholder verification code in here. All right, so we have these two inputs. And of course, above these inputs, we can have a bunch of labels. So I can add a label here. All right, and let me call this label email. And let me add another label over here. And let me call this label verification code. All right, so the user is going to enter their email, is going to enter their verification code, and maybe right at the top here, I could also have an H1 saying sign in Jobot. All right, like that. And it could be centered and all. And we might want to put a button. So let's put a button called one is send code. So when you type in an email, and then you can click a send code button to actually send a verification code. So let's call this maybe, let's give this a border. So there is this send code button. All right. And similarly, we can have another button that says verify code. Okay, so the idea here is the user is going to enter their email over here. Let's say sydney@jovian.com. And they're going to click send code. And we're going to send a code from using Supabase to them over email. And then the user is going to get that code and enter that code over here, the verification code. And they're going to click verify code. and that verification code is going to get verified. And again, then they're going to get logged in, and then we're going to take them back to the chat user interface. Okay. Now, of course, it can take a while to actually implement this entire user interface. So what I'll do is I'll just grab what I have here. So I have just a little bit of UI, which is going to simply just show this, what I've already shown you, just built out slightly nicely. Okay, so let me just come in here like that, and let's post it or paste it. Yeah, and looks like there are a few things that we are referring to that might be causing a problem. Let's see. Yeah, email, send code. All right, almost there. Yeah, so this is what the user interface looks like. We have magically created this user interface over here, which contains this sign-in Jobot at the top, or let's just call it login instead of sign-in, since we're using the term login everywhere. So login Jobot, that is the title of this, and then it asks the user for an email, so they can say something like sydney@jovian.com, send code, and then it asks the user to enter a verification code. Again, we've not defined a few things. We'll fix that in a second, but it asks the user to enter a verification code, and then they can click sign in. And we also have this helpful message: by signing in, you agree to our terms of use and privacy policy. Okay. So all we've done is created a login page. On that login page, we have a nav bar. And on that login page, we have this nice little login dialog. Okay. So two things I'm going to do here now. The first is, let's see, I'm going to create a state variable called email, and set email is the setter for that state variable. And this is again just how you create state in React. And I'm also going to create another state variable called code, and set code, again using use state, and by default its value is going to be empty. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to turn both of these into controlled components. So the value of the email field is going to come from the state variable email. And whenever the value of the email field changes, we want to actually set that value in the email state variable. Okay, again, more React stuff here. So it's something that you will get used to once you start doing some React programming. And similarly, right over here, we have this password field. So we have this value, which is the code, the verification code that the user has to enter. And whenever they enter something, we are going to update the state variable code using the set code function. All right. So with that, we have basically at this point implemented a basic login dialog, although it doesn't do anything for now. Clicking these buttons doesn't do anything, but we are capturing the email and the verification code. All right. Now, the next step for us is to actually go ahead and do something when the user clicks send code, for example. Okay. How do we do that? So here's what we can do. We can define an on-click handler for the button called send code, and I'm going to define it here. So I'm going to say async function send code, and this async function send code is going to simply call the Supabase API. Now, how do we call the Supabase API? Now, remember, in our app.js, we've done all this work. So what this allows us to do is Supabase helpers gives us a very helpful library. So we can say const Supabase equals use Supabase client, and just like that, and we simply call it, and now we have access to a Supabase object on which we can call a bunch of helper functions. All right. So now you can ask, now you can maybe just look up online. So Supabase auth, Supabase JS library auth. All right. And we can go into Supabase documentation, and let's see. In the Supabase documentation, I'm going to go into the client library, the JavaScript library that we are using. And in the JavaScript library, I want to sign in a user using an OTP. So I'm going to go into sign in a user through OTP. And it has a code example here. And basically what it says is that you need to get a Supabase object, which we are able to get here simply by saying use Supabase client, because we've connected our Next.js project to Supabase using all these libraries and the changes in app.js and all, and the end.local file, etc. So now we have the Supabase object, and we simply need to say this. Okay, we simply need to say in our send code function, we want to, let's get rid of these options for here right now. So what we want to do is we want to take the email that the user entered, and we want to call supabase.auth.signin with OTP, with that particular with the particular email that the user has entered. Remember, this email state variable contains the email that is entered here. And we can also just console.log this. So we can say console.log email entered is email before we do this. And the Supabase auth API, it is asynchronous. That's why we need this await. But basically, that's going to give us some data, and that is going to give us potentially an error. So we can now check if data is present, then we can say console.log verification code sent. All right. And otherwise, we can say if there is an error. So if error is not empty, then we can just print console.error. Okay. So failed to send verification code. All right. So if you've configured Supabase properly, at this point, the verification code should get sent properly. So I'm going to open up my developer tools over here as well. Just keep them here in the corner. Let's maybe make this a little smaller. Let's make this a little bigger and zoom in into our developer tools. So what I expect to see is when I type, let's say Sydney@jovian.com and I click send code, you can see here it says email entered Sydney@jovian.com, and then it says verification code sent. So it has sent a verification code to Sydney@jovian.com. Let's go and check that. So if I go into gmail.com, yeah, so you can see here that I have this confirm your sign up. I have this thing, confirm your sign up, that has been sent. But when I click this link, that is going to go somewhere to some random place, not necessarily my server over here. I don't want to use a confirmation link. What I want to do instead is actually use a code which the user can come and paste here. All right. So to set up a confirmation code, we need to configure this on Supabase. So I'm going to go into Jovian Dev or Jobot Dev on Supabase. And I'm going to go into the authentication. So I'm on the project dashboard over here. So inside, you go into Supabase and let's see. Just go into app.supabase.com, open up your project, and then for that project, go into the authentication section. And in the authentication section, you can actually configure what should be sent in these emails. All right. So I'm going to go into email templates over here. And there are two templates that we're going to change. The first template here is confirm sign up. Okay, confirm your sign up. And let's just change this to confirm your sign up Jobot, so that we know that this is coming from the Jobot application. Second, it says here, follow this link to confirm your user. Instead, let me change this to enter this code to, again, just zooming in. Yeah. Instead, I'm going to change this to enter this code to create your account. Or simply say enter this code to sign up. Okay, and here instead of confirmation URL, you can see that it says here that I have this variable called .token. I'm simply going to say .token over here, and let's actually get rid of this entire ahref thing, and let's just put in the token over here like that. Okay, so let me save that. And with that, now the next time I try to log in using this user interface, the email is going to say confirm your sign up Jobot. And let me also put Jobot over here. Let me also put Jobot over here. And it is going to include a code instead of a link. All right. I'm going to do the same thing once again for another one. So this is for sign up. But when we are doing login, it's going to go into this magic link template. So again, instead of magic link, I'm going to say your verification code Jobot. And let's call this verification code Jobot, and I'm going to say here for enter this code, enter this verification code. All right. And this time, of course, again, we don't really want, we don't really want the URL. We want the token. So for that, I simply put in .token. Okay. And again, that is again something that is written here. Now, how did I figure this out? Well, I simply searched online how to customize the email that Supabase sends, and it pointed me to the Supabase documentation, and that's where I have changed it. All right. So for most of software development, that's what you have to do. You just have to look things up and make those changes to make it work. Okay, so we have updated the email that Supabase sends to show the token instead of the account, instead of the URL. So let's try that again. Sydney@jovian.com. I'm going to click send code again. And again, it says email entered Sydney@jovian.com and verification code sent. And now if I go back here it says confirm your sign up Jobot. And let's click on this button, confirm your sign up Jobot. And now it says that I can enter this verification code. You can see here it says enter this verification code. So let me copy this verification code. Let me paste it in here and click sign in. But of course, our sign in is not doing anything yet. So we have implemented the logic to send the code, the verification code, but we have not implemented the logic to actually sign the user in. And for that, again, we can check the documentation. Okay, I'm in the documentation for the JavaScript library of Supabase. How did I find this? I can just search Supabase JS docs. Okay, and that brings me to the Supabase docs. And on the documentation, open up the JavaScript section. And on the JavaScript section, under authentication, verify and log in through an OTP. All right. So verify and log in through an OTP. It is going to take an email or something, and it's going to verify that email along with the token or the code that was provided by the user. We can sign up or sign in the user. Okay. So let me copy this in, and let me first create another function here. So I'm going to create an on-click handler called submit code. All right. Submit code. So submit code is going to be the on-click handler when we click sign in over here. Okay. Now you can go up here and you can say async function submit code. And what that does is, well, it's going to take the code and it's going to submit it. So let me just paste that in here. So we are saying supabase.auth.verify. And we need to give it an email, and the email is simply the email that has already been entered. The token is going to be the code that the user has entered. So remember, we have this code in the state variable over here. Let's bring that onto the next line so that it's easy to see. And then there is a type. So now the type could either be sign up if the user is coming for the first time, or if the user is coming for the second time, then this could be of the type magic link. All right, so there are two types of, for signing in, we have to use the type magic link. For sign up, we have to use the type sign up. So let me first implement it for magic link, because signing in is probably going to be the more frequent thing that people do on the site. So let's first implement it for magic link. And then we can say if data, and we can now say console.log signed in successfully. And I am going to, I'm going to just log the data value of the data as well. Otherwise, if error, then I'm going to say console.error signed failed to sign in. Okay. So for now, I'm going to print the error in here as well. So for now, I'm trying to attempt to sign in, not sign up, because I've specified the type over here as magic link in the supabase.auth.verify OTP function. For sign up, I would have to specify sign up. But let's try this. Let's try and see what happens. So again, I enter Sydney@jovian.com and I click send code, and a code is going to be sent. And in a second, you should see over here that it says verification code sent. And now, maybe zoom that in a little more. And now again, if I come back here, I can see that, okay, a new verification code has been posted here. Let me come in here and let me put in this verification code, but we're still trying to sign up, remember, so it should fail. So I click sign in and it says, okay, what does it say here? It says, failed to sign in auth API error. Only an email address or phone number should be provided on verify. Supabase.auth.verify OTP. Yeah. So something definitely went wrong, but let me try changing this to sign up and let's see what happens this time. So again, I'm going to click sign in once again. It should say email. Yeah. Let's try that again. Let me change it back to magic link. and let's click sign in. So this time it failed, but this time it failed saying that the token is invalid. That's because our type should be sign up over here. But if I say sign up, you will see that if I click sign in, then the user is signed in successfully. So we've been able to actually sign in a user successfully. Of course, we were doing this for the sign up flow. Now, of course, now if we always have the type set as sign up here, then the login flow is going to fail. So here's a quick trick that I'm going to apply. I'm going to try the login flow first. So I'm going to say type magic link first. And then if it fails, then I'm going to call the API once again. Okay. And I'm simply going to rename the outputs this time to error D2 and E2. And this time I'm going to call it with sign up. Okay. So all we're doing here is first trying to verify the OTP to try to log in the user by the type magic link. And if we are able to do that, that's great. If not, then we are going to try to verify the OTP by trying to sign up the user or create the user account for the first time. And again, I can say if D2, which is the output of this, then console.log signed up successfully D2, and let's log D2 over here. And if we have an error here, or actually this should say E2, if we have an error in the second flow as well, so then there is something else that's gone wrong, right? So then we can say console.error E2. So let's just say sign up failed. All right, like that. Perfect. So now we should be able to both log in our users and sign them up as well. Let's try again. Let's reload this page. I'm going to type in sydney@jovian.com and hit send code. And that is going to send this code over here. So now we have sent this code. And this time, of course, Sydney's account is already created. So now I get this verification code. And now I come in here. And now I paste this verification code. And I click sign in. And it says here that the user was signed in successfully. Okay. Let me try a sign up flow this time. Let me make it Sydney +1. And this is still going to go to sydney@jovian.com, but it is going to be treated as a separate user. So this is a trick. You can always attach +123 to the name of to your email ID, and that will still, if it's Gmail, it's still going to go to the same email. Okay. And let's get rid of this verification code. And let me click send code. And this time, a verification code is going to be sent. It is for confirm your sign up. So it's a sign up code. So when I try to enter this sign up code over here and I click sign in, it's going to try to do the sign in flow first. That's going to fail. And then it's going to try the sign up flow, and that is going to work hopefully. And that's what happened. So it says signed in successfully. Okay. So it looks like the sign in failed, but anyway, failed to sign in, but it signed up successfully. All right. So with that, I think we have been able to sign up successfully. I think what we need to do is we actually need to check if data.user is defined, not data. So data.user or data.user. All right. Yeah, that would work properly. Yeah. So now we have been able to create this login flow. Now we're just going to make a few minor improvements over here to actually inform the user that the verification code has been sent and so on. So I'm going to incorporate this new library now called React Hot Toast. Okay, I'm just going to show you how to show a pop-up message to the user. So I'm going to install this library, React Hot Toast. All right, the React Hot Toast library has been added. And now I'm going to import it. So I'm going to say import toast, toaster from React Hot Toast. Okay. And I'm going to render this toaster. This toaster is going to produce toasts, and we'll see what toasts are in just a second. But I'm going to render this toaster over here. So far nothing has happened. Let's see, React Hot Toast. Maybe let me just restart the server so that React Hot Toast actually gets picked up. Yeah, let's reload this once again. So all we're doing still is just creating the basic sign up flow. Okay, I think I didn't install it in the right place. I need to go into Jobot Web and do npm install React Hot Toast. And that should be done in a second. And now we should be able to reload. Okay, so we've put up a toaster, and now using this toaster, we can show toasts or we can show pop-ups. So here's what I'm going to say. If the verification code is sent properly, then actually let's do it this way. If we get an error, then we are simply going to return, and otherwise we're going to do this. And apart from logging to console, we're also going to say toast.success verification code sent, check your email. And if there is an error, we're going to show toast.error failed to send verification code. All right, and let's reload that, and let us try to enter Sydney@jovian.com and hit send code. And you see here, verification code sent, check your email. So that's what React Hot Toast does. It gives you two things. It gives you a toaster, which is a component that you have to add inside your code, inside your user interface somewhere. And it gives you a function called toast, and you can call toast.error or toast.success. Okay, so now anytime you hit send code, yeah, now it says failed to send verification code because you can only send one code every 60 seconds. Now let's add another toast here. Again, let's maybe put in this data.user. Yeah, okay, this is fine. So let's do data question mark in case data is not defined. And let's do toast.success. And once again, let's type in here. So signed in successfully. But if we fail to sign in, we don't want to show a toast. We want to first try to sign up again. And then now we can say toast.success signed up successfully. All right. And if we fail to sign in and sign up both, then we can just say toast.error failed to sign in / sign up. All right. Let's see if that works. So first I've entered nothing here. Let me click sign in, and it says failed to sign in or sign up. Let me grab the code that was sent again. Your verification code is such and such right over here. And let me paste that verification code and click sign in. Now it says signed in successfully. Okay. So all we've done so far in about an hour is we've added this login dialog. But once we've added this login, things are going to become very simple. The last thing we need to do, the very last thing, is actually after login, go back to the index page. How do we do that? Well, for that, Next.js gives us a helper function called a router. So we can do this. We can say const router equals use router. So everything in React.js and Next.js comes through these hooks, which basically give you a bunch of helpful things. And now in this router, we can actually push a new route or a new page to this router. So I'm going to come in here, and when my sign up or sign in or sign up is successful, I'm going to simply say router.push, and I'm going to push the index route or the / route or the home page route. Okay, so I'm going to send the user back to the home page once they are signed in. And once again here as well, router.push /. Okay, so let's see that flow again. So I have Sydney@jovian.com, and I click send, and a code is sent over here. Perfect, verification code sent. Let me come back in here. Let me copy that verification code. And let me paste that code in here and sign in. It's going to sign me in, and it's going to then take me back to the chat interface. So just like that, we are back to the chat interface. And of course, here it still says login. So maybe that is the next thing we can fix. But clicking on this login is going to take you to the login page, and then filling out the details is going to bring you back. And now we have a user authentication that we've added. Okay. Now in the navbar, it would be nice to maybe have login and log out depending on whether we have a user or not. So that's once again where we can use a helper from the Supabase React helpers. So we could just say const user equals use user, and use user is going to come from Supabase auth helpers for React, and this is going to get us or contain the information about the currently logged in user. And here's what we can say. We can say that if the user is present, so if user question mark, which means if the user is present, then we don't actually want to say login. We want to say log out. And if the user is not present, then we want to say login. Okay. So let's say log out here, and let's redirect that to /logout. And if the user is present, then we show if the user is not present, then we show login. Okay. So now you can see here that it says logout, and clicking on /logout actually again goes to a missing page because we have not defined the logout page yet. So the next thing for us to do is to define a logout page so that we have the full login, logout flow complete end to end. So inside my pages.js, I'm going to click new file, and I'm going a little fast here because you can always pause and you can study what we are doing and you can follow it step by step on your end. But let's open logout.js, a page inside our src folder. And now let's do export default function logout. And on this logout, well, I don't actually want to show anything here. But what I want to do is I want to just call the logout function of Supabase. So first, let me get the Supabase client. So Supabase equals use Supabase client. Perfect. Now we have the Supabase client using this helper function that Supabase has given us. Now, how do we log users out? So I'm again going back to the documentation of the Supabase JavaScript client, and let's see, sign out a user. So to sign out a user, we simply called supabase.auth.signout, and we have to call it here. Okay, so let's copy that and let's paste that in here. Okay, but that does not work. We can't exactly do that. How exactly do we call this await, or how exactly do we work with a promise or do something once the page loads? Now for that, React has something called a use effect hook. Okay. Basically, what happens with this use effect hook is you give it a function, and that function is going to get rendered or executed every time the component is rendered or something changes on the page, on this particular page. All right. Again, check out the documentation of use effect, what it means. But what we want to do here is we want to say supabase.auth. What was it? Sign out. Sign out. All right. And then once we have signed out the current user, then we can now say .then, and we can provide what to do after signing out the user. Now, after signing out the user, it would be nice to then take them back to the home page, or maybe take them back to the login page. So I could do this. I could say const router equals use router. All right. And I could now say router.push. Let me just send them to the home page again. Okay. So one other thing we need to do in use effect is provide a list of dependencies. When should it get re-rendered? So I'm going to provide the couple of dependencies, Supabase and router. Okay. I'm again not going to get into the details of this use effect hook here. I have we linked to a tutorial on the React documentation, but this is just basic React stuff. What we want to do is on the /logout page, when the page loads, we want to run this code, supabase.auth.signout, and once that code has run, then we want to push. We want to say router.push /, which means we want to redirect to the to the index page. Okay, so let me reload. And currently there is a user, and that's why this user is that's why it says log out here. I click log out. That redirects to the / page, and now that has done the user logout, and now we have this login over here. All right, and now I can click login, and I can select again Sydney@jovian.com, click send code. Perfect. And now I should receive a verification code here over email, and I have this verification code over here, and I copy it and I paste it back here, and I click sign in, and now I'm signed in and back to the chat UI. Okay, so that's basically how we have set up the login, that now we have an authenticated user, and now we're ready to make some changes into the chat UI. Perfect. Well, that took a while, but most of our work is now done. So we have created a logout page as well. And now the next thing we need to do is we need to set up, instead of hitting the OpenAI API directly. So if I just go back here and show you, what we do is we have this button submit or this button send. And what happens when you click send, let me see. Hi, who are you? What happens is we try to read an API key, but of course we are no longer entering an API key. So we try to read an API key, and then that API key is going to be included in a request that is sent to the OpenAI API. You can see here we have this send request function that gets called when we hit send. And we first check if a message has been entered. Then we check if an API key is provided. Then we construct a new set of messages. We set some state. But here is where the main thing happens. We are going to call this fetch. We're going to call fetch API URL over here. And the API URL is this OpenAI API URL. Chat completions URL, and we also give it the authentication API key. So we give it an API key as an authorization header, and then we give it the set of messages. We mention which model we want to call, etc., etc., and then we stream its response. Okay. Now here is the problem with this setup as we have it right now. So right now, we have our users browser over here. And in the user's browser, we have OpenAI over here. All right. So OpenAI, the API call to OpenAI requires an API key. You cannot call the OpenAI API without an OpenAI API key. However, if you reveal the OpenAI API key in the browser, if you somehow send it to your user's browser, then the user can just check the source code of your application or just get your API key out of the browser, and the user can just use that to send as many requests as they want, right? So the entire purpose of creating user login, etc. is defeated. So what we are going to do here is we are going to create an API of our own that is going to run on the Vercel server. Okay, so the Next.js application runs on the user's browser. And this API, so our application is going to call our API route. So Next.js also allows you to create APIs that can run on a server. That's why it's a full stack framework. So our application is going to call an API route. The API route is going to call the OpenAI API. The OpenAI API is going to return a response. And by the way, we are going to store or access our OpenAI API key. OpenAI API key securely in the server, and then we are going to now use that to call the OpenAI API, stream the response, and then stream that back to the browser. Okay, so this is called proxying, but the basic idea that we are covering here is we have the browser, and then we have the OpenAI servers. We are putting an API in between. What this API is going to check is whether the user is logged in. If the user is logged in, then it's going to read our super secret API key that is going to be configured on the server. It's going to send out a request to OpenAI, and OpenAI is going to stream back the response, and it is going to then stream back the response back to our browser. Okay, and this is where we are now letting different users log in, and each user will be able to then make calls on their own, and then we can put limitations for each user. We could say that each user can only send 10 messages in a minute or something like that. So that's what we're doing. We are setting up a API proxy of sorts. Now to do that, there's a simple there's this OpenAI stream helper file or helper function that I'm just going to copy paste because these details are not important. What's important is basically, you see here, we are creating this object called OpenAI stream. What it does is it takes a body and it calls the OpenAI API with the body, and it is going to have a content type application JSON. It is going to configure here the authorization. So it's actually going to configure the authorization bearer token, and it's going to pick up this value from our env.local file. So remember, we had created that env.local file. So the env.local file had two variables. Those two variables were used in the browser by Supabase, by our Supabase client, but it had a third variable called OpenAI API key. That variable will only be used on the server. Okay, and that is why if I go up here and show you that point where we added those variables. So we created two variables, next public Supabase URL and next public anon key. Any environment variable that has next public in front of it is sent to the browser. Whereas any environment variable that does not have next public in front of it is only maintained on the server and can only be used on the server side code that you write in Next.js. Okay, so our OpenAI API key is securely available on the server. It's not going to be available in the browser. So I'm going to come back in here, and I'm going to take this OpenAI stream code, which basically calls the OpenAI API, which is the chat completions API, with whatever messages, body options, whatever we send it. and it's going to create that stream for reading. Remember, we have to stream it so that we can get it word by word, and it's going to simply return that stream. So let me just copy this OpenAI stream right till, oops. Let's just zoom that out and so that I can copy it easily. And I'm going to put this in the folder src utils openai.js. Okay. And again, don't worry if this does not particularly make sense, because you would basically just have to use this exact same code every time you are working with the OpenAI stream. Okay. So let's just take this whole thing over here. And I'm going to create a folder called src. I'm going to create a folder called utils. And in this utils folder, I'm going to create a file, openai.js. And in this, I'm going to paste these two things in. And looks like we need this another line of code here from event source parser, which is again just a helper library that we installed the last time already. Okay. So now we have event source parser, we have this OpenAI stream. So this OpenAI stream function is simply going to be used simply to call the OpenAI API, and that's going to call the API. And then we have another function over here, stream OpenAI response. This is what we can actually use in our index.js when we are calling our API endpoint. Okay, so that's the OpenAI API or the OpenAI helper function that we're going to use. Now let's set up this API that we talked about, this API that can actually look for the user login and then check things, and then check the Supabase login, then collect our OpenAI key and make the request. So for that, we are going to create a file under the pages/API folder. So you can see that there is already this file called hello.js. So what you can do is you can actually go to /hello/API/hello, and you see that it prints name John Doe. All right. So Next.js has support for creating API endpoints as well, apart from routes, apart from pages that you access. And API endpoints are simply placed in a folder called API inside the pages folder. And in that API folder, you can basically define this function called a handler. And that handler is simply going to have a request and a response, and you can simply send whatever, you can do whatever processing you want and send whatever response you want. Okay. So I'm going to create an API here called chat.js. And into chat.js, I'm going to add in some code for the API. Again, I will not get into the details here, too many of the details here, because this is again some pretty standard code. All we are doing is, we'll look at it in just a second. But here's what we're doing. The first thing we do is we import the OpenAI stream, the simple utility function that we had created in the OpenAI.js file. Then we are going to create the Supabase client. Just like we had created a Supabase client in the browser, we have a helper function to create a Supabase client in the server. And again, this is something that you just look up on the Supabase documentation and do it. And then we are just configuring this to the Edge runtime, and this is again required for streaming. So if you just search Next.js API route, how to stream data, it's going to say use the Edge runtime. And finally, here is the actual code. So in this code, what we do is we create a middleware Supabase client. So we give it the request and response, and we get that Supabase client. Then we get the body of the request. So whatever data is going to be sent from our browser to this API, we get that body. Then what we do is we try to check the user. So we say supabase.auth.getUser. So we say supabase.auth.getUser. So we check if a user is currently logged in into our application or not. And if the user is not logged in, or if we get an error, then we say that we are unauthorized. Otherwise, we simply call the OpenAI stream and we pass into it the body, which is all the options that the user has provided, which is the message history and maybe the model name, etc. And we simply return that as a response to our browser. Okay. So that's all this is doing. And you can also just go into jovian.com/jobot and you can ask, and you can check the code explainer, and you can go into the code explainer and ask what this code does. So let's see, JavaScript, or let me just say Next.js. And it's going to tell you exactly what this says. So it defines an API route handler. It first creates a Supabase client middleware. It does it, and it explains the whole thing line by line. Okay. But this is basically copy paste code. Essentially, this is something that I've looked up from elsewhere, just put it in here. All it does is checks whether a user is logged in using Supabase. And then if a user is logged in, it's going to use this OpenAI stream from openai.js, this helper file that we have created. And it is going to then make a request and pass on that data back to the browser. Okay. So with that, we have created our chat/API/chat API. But of course, nothing has changed here. So far, even if here we click send, it just says that you need to provide API key and all. So we are now ready to finally make some changes in our index.js file. Okay, so what we have is we have an API that we created, and the index.js file needs to call that API, and that API is going to call the OpenAI API. All right. So let's come in and let's start making some changes into send request. First thing, I'm going to no longer check whether there is an API key. That is no longer required. I am going to remove this set API key function as well. That is also no longer required. I am going to change this API URL. I'm going to change the API URL to simply /API/chat, so that I'm making the call to the API route that we have defined in pages/API/chat.js. Okay, so that is one change. Now, one other thing I can do is right at the top, I can actually just get the Supabase user that is currently logged in. So I can say const user equals use user that is coming from Supabase. And I can say if not user, then I can simply show an alert. Please log in to send a message. All right. And now, of course, now we get the old set of messages that were already present. Then we add the new user message to it with the role user, and then we set these messages. All this was explained in the previous lesson, so I'll not get into this here. Okay, now we can actually make a request to that API URL. So I don't need this authorization because the API key is no longer provided by the user. That is going to be handled in our API endpoint that we just created. All of this is the same. So we provide a model, we provide a set of messages, and we want to stream this. So all of this is fine. And then if the response is not 200, then we are simply going to return an error. Okay. Now we had all this code here where we were using this create parser and all that. Much of that is already being done for us in our API endpoint. So I'm going to get rid of all of this code, which is going to just do all that streaming business for us. And in our OpenAI helper, we have this helper function called stream API response. Okay, so I'm just going to call this helper function stream API OpenAI API response, to which I'm going to give the response that was sent from our API endpoint that we just created. And now this is going to give us the new message. Okay, the current full message that we have received so far, and we are going to take that new message and we are going to construct new messages 2, which is going to be, or we're going to construct updated messages 2. So remember here we have this updated set of messages to which we have into the message history we've added the user message. Now let's add update messages 2. That is going to take the updated messages, and we are going to add to it the new message with the role assistant and the content new message. And let's also log the new message here. So maybe first let's just log the new message over here, and we'll do the adding the code here slightly later. Yeah. All right. So I'm currently logged in over here, and let me clean this up. Now I'm logged in and I'm going to say, hi, who are you? Okay. And what happens when I click send is we are going to call the send request function. The send request function is going to check if a user message has been entered. If yes, then it's going to check if a user is present or logged in. If yes, then it's going to add this message to the message history. That's what all this code is doing. We looked at it the last time. Then it is going to send the data to our API URL. Let me just bring that API URL in here so that things are very straightforward for us to understand. Yeah. So /API/chat. and it is going to post that content, all the model, the messages, and it's going to stream it, and it's going to check if the response has an invalid status code. If yes, it's going to return an error. And let me just simplify this error as well a little bit. And then it's going to stream the OpenAPI response. So we just pass in the response into it. It's going to get byte by byte, event by event, and it's going to just give us this callback that's going to get called multiple times each time the message is updated. Okay. Now, if I send hi, who are you? You should be able to see here shortly in the console that it says hello, I am Jobot, a helpful, versatile assistant, etc., etc. So our new message variable is getting updated again and again to the latest version of the message. So one by one, the words are getting added. Okay, so now let's just put that into our state. And if we just put that into our state, we should be done. So let's set up user or set messages to updated messages to, like that. And I think we should be done. So now at this point, what we have is, let me come in here and let me say, hi, who are you? And let me hit send. And it says, hello, I'm Jobot, a helpful and versatile AI created by Jovian. Except if I now go into the network tab, you will see here that we have made a request not to the OpenAI API directly, but we have made a request to /Akash, which is simply our GitHub Codespace public URL /API/chat. Okay, so /chat is where we have made the request /API/chat, and that chat API has received this payload, a bunch of messages, the model, etc. And then it has received a bunch of previews, and it has basically received this response which was streamed, and now it has streamed that response, and it has shown it here on the page. Okay, so now users are logging in, and these logged in users are actually able to access this. And I can go here and I can log out. And if I log out and I say, hi, who are you? And I click send, you can see that it says, please log in to send a message. And it also says OpenAI API returned an error, and it just goes back all the way. Maybe I can just return right over here so that we don't even get to that point. All right. So yeah, if I try to send hi over, it says, please log in to send a message. And if I don't have a message, then it says, please enter a message before you hit send. Maybe even move the login part before. All right, like that. So let's log in and check the flow. So let me log in sydney@jovian.com. Let me click send code. That should send a verification code. So verification code should have been sent here. Let me grab that new verification code. Let me put that in here, and let me click sign in now. And now I'm signed in, and now I can say, hi, who are you? And click send. And it says, hi, I'm Jobot, such and such, etc., etc. Great, perfect. Teach me some JavaScript. And I click send. And it says, sure, JavaScript are popular programming languages that are widely used for creating interactive web pages and building web applications. Here are some basic concepts to get you started, etc., etc. All well and good, perfect. Now, the last thing I might want to do is maybe add some kind of rate limiting. I don't want users to send too many messages and use up the entire API credits that I have. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually hard code the model in my API. So instead of letting the user specify the model, maybe the user can change the code and specify the model. Instead of letting them specify the model, I am going to go into my API settings over here, API chat, and I'm simply going to say, after getting the body, I'm simply going to say body.model equals GPT 3.5 Turbo. So I'm going to restrict them to only be able to use GPT 3.5 for now until I add some rate limits, and I should probably add some rate limits quickly as well. But now that we have done that, I think functionality wise, we are more or less done. So now what we can do is we can now commit these changes to our branch. So we can say added sign in and API proxy route. Okay, and we can click commit. Now, when we click commit, all the changes are going to get added to our GitHub repository, and it's going to say, actually, if I come back here, you can see that our main branch still contains the old code. In the main branch, you can see that we have public all of that, it is still the old code. But what we have is we have pushed a new branch called user login. And using this new branch, we can create a pull request. So we can create a request where we can review all the changes and push those changes into the main branch. Okay, so let me click compare and pull request to create a pull request. And that's what I've done. So I've added a login and logout page. So connected to Supabase project and added an API that checks login and calls the OpenAI API. Okay, let's create that pull request over here. And in this pull request, we'll be able to see what are all the changes we've done. So there's some change in package log.json. Okay, I think this got added. Jobot. Okay, now this is fine. Package log.json changes every time we add new packages. So we've added this auth helpers Next.js, auth helpers React.js, and Supabase.js, and we've added React Hot Toast. These are all the different libraries we used. We've added a navbar component inside src/navbar.js. So yeah, this navbar component is simply going to be used to show the navbar over here, and that navbar is also going to check for the user and show logout or login appropriately. Then we have added in our app.js file, we've added this bunch of helpers to create a Supabase browser client and then provide that, make that available everywhere within the app using this session context provider. So that is fine. Then we created this chat API. What it does is it has this handler where it basically creates this Supabase object using this creates middleware Supabase client helper function. It gets the request body and it sets the body's model to GPT 3.5 Turbo. And then it checks whether the user is currently logged in. If the user is not logged in, it's going to say unauthorized. If the user is logged in, then it is going to stream the user. It is going to open an OpenAI stream. That's just a helper function that we have created that's going to do the streaming with the OpenAI library, and it's going to get that response, and it's going to say send that stream back. Okay, so that's that. Then we have in pages index.js, we are now using the navbar instead of hard coding the navbar, and we are also checking for the user, and we made a bunch of changes to send requests. So our API URL is gone. We are no longer directly contacting OpenAI. We are checking if the user is not present. If the user is not logged in, we just deny the request. And if the user does not, if the user has not entered a message, we deny the request. And instead of fetching the OpenAI URL, we are fetching /API/chat, our intermediate API, this one over here. And then we are, instead of doing all the parsing for us, we have a helper function that we've created called stream API response, which takes the response and it calls this callback function every time a new token is received with the entire response joined to it. Okay. And finally, we have this navbar that we've added here. Okay. Finally, we have this login page as well. On the login page, we simply have this simple input, this one over here. So we have the simple user interface that we have on the login page where you can enter an email, enter a verification code, and click sign in. So that's all this user interface that we have on the login page. And we have a logout page over here. Now the logout page, all it does is simply it calls supabase.auth.signout and it gets Supabase using the use Supabase client. And then now we have this OpenAI helper functions, and this is just going to be something that you can copy paste into any project that you are working with. All it does is it picks up the environment variable OpenAI API key, and then it constructs the headers, constructs the method, the body, and it calls the actual chat completions API, and it creates a stream, and it returns that stream, which can then be sent back. In the same file, we also have this async function stream OpenAI response, which is used in our index.js to actually stream the response. Again, just some helper code that we have put away so that we can use easily. So you should be able to take this OpenAI.js file, put it into whatever work you're doing with OpenAI APIs, and you should be able to use it just fine. Okay, looks like a couple of useless files got added because I accidentally ran npm install right at the top of the directory. So I'm going to get rid of these two. There is this package log.json and package.json that is there, not in the Jobot web folder, but outside the Jobot web folder. So let me say remove stray files and commit it and push it. Okay, so it's always a good idea to just review all of your code before you push it. But apart from reviewing it, There's one other thing that we can do. We can actually go into the, if we check the conversation here, you will see that Vercel will actually do a preview deployment for us. Okay, Vercel is going to do a preview deployment for us for this branch. So apart from the main deployment that is there on jobot.dev.vercel.app and on jobot.dev, for every branch, every pull request that we create, Vercel creates a preview deployment where we can preview the changes. But seems like the preview deployment failed. So let's inspect this deployment and see what went wrong. Okay, create parser is defined but never used. Okay, let's fix that. So that is not a big issue. So let's come in here into index.js and remove this. Okay, remove unused variable. I think it's probably too much to complain for an unused variable, but it's fine. It keeps our code clean. But let's see. It's going to try and deploy again. So let's check out how the deployment goes this time. So Vercel is taking our branch and deploying it to a special preview URL. And you can see here what it's doing is it's basically getting the code that we have just pushed to GitHub. It is going to install the dependencies. It has installed them. Then it's going to build it. So it's going to bundle up the entire app to make it more efficient, optimize it, and then it's going to deploy it on the server. So it's going to, of course, deploy the web application that we have. But apart from it, the API that we created, that is also going to get deployed. And Vercel is the platform that we're using simply. Okay, then it says either next public Supabase URL or, so seems like these variables are not created yet. So what's happening here? Well, if you recall, when we were checking the files here, there was no .env.local file. That is because the env.local file where we have put in our credentials, and I'm not going to open it. I'm just going to show you here that there is an env.local file. And inside this, we have put in 3 credentials, the Supabase project ID, project URL, the Supabase anon key, and we've put in the OpenAI API key. All of these are not going to get sent into GitHub because that GitHub repository is actually public and I don't want to expose all of my credentials to everyone on the internet. That is why by default, the env.local file is going to be git ignored. So it is just for local development. Okay, the env.local file is for local development. Now, but how do we then supply these variables for the deployment? So that is where Vercel has, if I go back into the project page, Vercel has a section here under project settings called environment variables. So let me open up environment variables over here. And here, what we can do is we can actually add in the Supabase, the same 3 environment variables that we had earlier. So let me go up all the way here. Let's see. Yeah, we need to add in all these 3 environment variables: next public Supabase URL, next public anon key, and OpenAI API key. So let's add in all these environment variables. So I'm going to click here, next public Supabase URL. I'm going to click here, next public anon key, and I'm going to click here, and I'm going to enter the OpenAI API key. Okay. Now, of course, these are secure values that I should not be revealing on YouTube live videos. I'm going to take this into a different tab over here, and I'm going to enter the values, the actual values over there. So let me come back in here and enter the value. Let me come back in here and enter the value. And I'm entering the third value as well. I'm doing it on a separate desktop, so you will not be able to see it. And enter the value and hit save. All right. So now I've added those environment variables. Let me bring this back over here. So now you can see that I've added the values for next Supabase public URL. You can see this is what it looks like roughly. Next public Supabase URL, next public Supabase anon key, and the OpenAI API key. I've added all these environment variables. And now I can go back into my deployments, and having added these environment variables, I can go in and redeploy. And let me click redeploy. And this time it is going to build, and hopefully it's going to install the dependencies. Then when it's trying to build the entire project, it's going to find the values of the environment variables that can be configured. Okay. So let's see, looks like the build is, looks like the build is going fine so far. Yep. And the build is going fine so far, all good. And it should be able to, it has created a compiled successfully the entire build, and it's going to collect that page data, and now it's going to deploy it. So let's give that just a second to get deployed. Okay, looks like it's all deployed, and it's going to assign a temporary domain. So just in a second, you'll see here that it has assigned a temporary domain over here for this particular. Okay, what's happening? Yeah, the deployment is complete. It's probably, yeah, there you go. So it has created this temporary domain for this branch, Jobot dev user git user dot Vercel dot app, but the original one. So if I go to jobot.dev, and jobot.dev is basically just pointing to jobot.dev.vercel.app. So I've just set up some DNS stuff. So you can see that the main application from the main branch still has this API key and all this. But this temporary branch, Jobot dev git login Vercel app, this has, let me just get rid of this, disable, yeah. So, but this temporary branch, this has a login button over here. So if I click send, it doesn't work. And if I say, who are you, and hit send, it still doesn't work. But if I click login and then I go in here and maybe do all that, let me go to sydney@jovian.com, send code. Let's get the code from here. Yeah, a new verification code has been sent. And let's enter that code, click sign in. Now I'm signed in. And now I can say, who are you? And Jobot replies saying, I'm Jobot, a helpful and versatile AI created by Jovian. My purpose is such and such. Great. So this is what you should always be doing. Create a branch. Using that branch, create a pull request. Review all the code in the pull request to make sure that you've done everything right. Then test the preview deployment. Make sure that your Vercel deployment goes through, the preview deployment goes through properly. Test it out. Test out the preview deployment. And now when you're ready, and often you can also ask a coworker to give you an approval. But when you are ready, you can click merge pull request and click confirm merge. And with that, now this branch is going to get merged into the main branch. And you can also delete this branch if you want. So now if we come back into the main branch over here, code, if I check the main branch over here, you can see that now the main branch contains everything that we've added. So it contains this inside SRC, it contains pages, and inside pages, it contains that API, and it contains chat.js, and it contains login.js. It still does not contain the env.local, but now that we have configured on Jobot, and now you can see that the main branch, so as soon as the main branch, the changes get merged to the main branch, the Vercel is going to automatically pick that up and it's going to do a new fresh deployment. And now that this fresh deployment is happening, and you can see here, it has access to all the environment variables and everything. So everything is looking good for now. Okay, so this is looking good. So I believe we should be in a position where, let's see, we are going to just wait for another couple of seconds. And at this point, our main application, which is jobot.dev.vercel.app, should now be updated. So now it says Jobot, it says login, it says ask me anything. And not just that, I've also connected it to the domain jobot.dev. So if you just open jobot.dev on your computer, you will be able to now access it. So I'll drop that in the chat for you. Okay. And now, again, you try to send without doing anything. It says, please log in to send a message. So I'll click login. And for one last time, I'm going to say sydney@jovian.com and click send code. And I'm going to get a verification code over here. So it says verification code sent. Let's get that final verification code over here. And let's log in over here. And now I am logged in on jobot.dev. So now jobot.dev has user login in just about a couple of hours of coding, maybe an hour or so more to investigate things. And now I can say, hey, who are you? And Jobot says, I am Jobot, a helpful and versatile AI assistant. And I can say, teach me some JavaScript, or teach me JavaScript functions. Okay. And it's going to generate a simple tutorial for me. It's going to show me an example here as well. And just like that, now we've given Jobot the ability, now we've added user login, and you can imagine where it goes from here. One thing that we can very simply do is that right now, if you reload the page, all of this goes away. So if I open jobot.dev in a new tab, It's all gone. So we can now use the Supabase database. We can store the conversation history for a user. That would be the first step. And then we can maybe allow the user to have multiple conversations, just like ChatGPT. So that is the second step. We can allow the user to maybe share that conversation publicly. So we can do whatever we want. At this point, we have a basic ChatGPT clone with a proper user sign in, etc. as well. So we can do whatever we want with it, right? And where is it? Yeah, this is the tutorial on functions in JavaScript. So do you have to implement all of this by yourself? Well, not necessarily, but in case you're looking to incorporate AI, ChatGPT powered features into any of your applications, you can use that. But wait for the next couple of episodes, because we are going to provide you a way to build applications on top of Jobot to give Jobot skills. So we have, remember this thing over here, we're going to teach Jobot some skills. We are going to create a way for you to generate skills for Jobot without having to write any code. So that is going to be the next thing that we work on. That is going to be really interesting. Just to give you a trailer of what that looks like. So this is what we have on Jovian, where apart from chatting with Jobot, you can actually also just use it to maybe explain some code. So this is a skill that we have taught Jobot. And let's see, maybe I want to get some explanation for what's happening here in this send code function. So I can come into the code explainer bot over here, and I can say the programming language is JavaScript, maybe even say like React, and I can paste in the code here and start conversation. And it says that this is an asynchronous function written in JavaScript React that sends a verification code. The function is called send code. It logs a message to the console. It calls sign in with OTP from the supabase.auth object, etc., etc. Okay. So we'll actually look in the next lesson. We'll see how to implement this particular piece of functionality. It's going to be pretty exciting. I think we're building on to some pretty exciting things. And in the lesson after that, you're going to be able to build your own skills using Jobot. So let's look into that the next time. And with that, we've reached the end of this lesson. So yeah, a bunch of the code was just copy pasted because it's not important from the perspective of like you don't need to actually implement all that code yourself. You can always just copy paste from anywhere. But here's what we did. We set up a cloud database using Supabase for storing user data. We allowed users to create an account to chat with Jobot without an API key. Then we set up an API endpoint that connects securely to OpenAI APIs. We should probably do some rate limiting, limit the number of times people can send messages to in a particular hour or something, and I'm going to add this right after this tutorial because otherwise it's possibly open for abuse. Then we can see that we configured some environment variables to securely learn, to securely connect to Supabase and securely connect from our server to the OpenAI API for a secure production deployment. And yeah. So check out these resources. Of course, we have some tutorials on HTML, CSS, React.js, Tailwind CSS, Flexbox, etc. But you should also definitely check out Supabase docs. So Supabase docs is just great. It has everything that you need. So you should probably check out the docs for the JavaScript function over here. So I'm going to come in here and add this in here as well. Supabase JS docs. Not just the JS docs, but the Supabase Next.js helper docs. Let's grab those as well. So Supabase Next.js helpers. I'm just going to search Supabase Next.js helpers. Yeah, right over here. Let's grab that as well. And probably you should also read about Next.js API routes if you want to understand how we created our own API. So right over here, we created Next.js API routes. So let me add that here as well. Okay. And then there are a bunch of other tutorials that you can check out as well. But the whole idea is that we are just showing you how an application is built, and these are all the pieces. So if you understand the steps on the high level, the details are something that you can figure out based on your particular use case. The details are something that you can look up. We have all the code here. So the details are something that you will be able to work out on your own. Okay. So with that, we've reached the end of this lesson. And we have given JoBot intelligence. We have given JoBot a web app, and now people can log into the web app and interact with JoBot's intelligence, which is basically just GPT 3.5 at this point. Next time, we are going to give JoBot some skills, and that is going to make it so much more versatile. And then we'll find a way to let users create their own skills as well. Okay, so that was episode 2, JoBot Meets the World. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please leave a like, please leave a comment. I know that there's a lot of material, a lot of code that we went through today, but as I said, the idea here is just to show you the process, and then you can get into the details if you want to. That's completely up to you. Or you can just follow along and kind of understand how a particular application is built that's powered by AI. Regardless whether or not you do this, do join the next episode, because you will be able to start using what we build in the next episode, even if you do not implement it yourself. Okay, so with that, we're going to wrap up. What to do next? Start chatting with JoBot. That's the best thing you can do just to understand its capabilities. Follow along and code it yourself and learn the prerequisites. Try fill in some of these gaps if you want, if you are feeling excited about building some of these applications, and participate in discussions. You can go on the course page, howtobuildanai.com, start a discussion. And we've added a new feature on discussions. So if you just go into a discussion, you actually have an Ask JoBot button here. So you can ask a question and then you can click Ask JoBot. So let's say, let me create a discussion that I didn't understand the code for the API endpoint. Okay, so can you explain this code? Okay, let me grab that code. Where is that code for the API endpoint? Let's see over here. Yeah, let me grab the code for the API endpoint, chat.js. Okay, and I'm just going to put that in here as code, and I'm going to post that discussion. Now, normally I or somebody from our team would take a look at this discussion and post an answer. But now, having posted your question, you can just click Ask JoBot, and it is going to tell you exactly what this does. And you can imagine that this works in exactly the same way that we just talked about. So it's about the possibilities. It's about what you can build using AI. You can embed it deeply into any application, and that is what we are slowly working towards. Okay, so yeah, I think this answers my question. It provides a pretty detailed explanation. So I'm just going to say here at the end, thanks JoBot. That answers my question. And I can just simply, at the very end of this, it gives me a pretty detailed response. Finally, this returns. Yeah, if you just read this, there's no piece of code that we looked at today which is not going to be clear to you if you just read this. So yeah, let's say, thanks JoBot, I understand. And let us resolve that query right away. Perfect. So with that, we have reached the end of episode 2, JoBot Meets the World. And this was the second episode of How to Build an AI, the Chronicles of JoBot. We are building some pretty exciting stuff here. And it's, of course, all the code is open source as well. So if you go into github.com/jovianhq/JoBot, you can check out the entire code here. So you can actually just copy over this code into your own repository, and you can build on top of it, build whatever you want with it. So please go ahead, have fun. I'm curious to see what you're going to build. So with that, we will close for today. This was How to Build an AI, and let's see if we have some questions. So I'm gonna try and answer some of these questions. Okay, first question, please share the link to the GitHub repo. Done. Second, 2 minutes brief on what exactly we are doing with this coding. We are building JoBot, an AI, step by step, giving it a lot of courses. When is the NLP course coming? Probably not, because now with the capabilities that ChatGPT has, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to train your own NLP models. You should rather just use a ChatGPT API. And okay, what else? Well, I will do it later offline. Yeah, please feel free to follow this. All of the videos are going to be available on howtobuildanai.com. And that's it. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.